Benvenuti a questa diretta streaming. Sono Alessandro Azzeni, con ospite Zach Griffith. Il dottor Griffith si sta occupando di una ricerca per la sua tesi di dottorato sulla Sardegna nuragica. Lietissimo di introdurre Zach, con cui ci siamo conosciuti a Sydney l'anno scorso. Fondamentalmente ascolteremo la sua presentazione sullo stato delle ricerche sul tema dell'archeologia del paesaggio in Sardegna. So in English, thank you so much for being on the channel. We are hosting Dr. In Italian terms, doctor, because we give the title of doctor even with a bachelor's degree. I know it's silly, but that's what we do. So Zach Griffith is doing an exceptional research on landscape archaeology on Sardinia, and I heard about Zach's idea when we were both in Sidi last year, so central Sardinia, for people who doesn't know where it is. And I was thrilled to give Zach the possibility of showing his work on my channel. I'm extremely proud of have you tonight here. In Italian terms, tonight, I know in Buffalo is 4 p.m., isn't it?
Yeah.
So, Zach, please tell us what you're doing, what your current state of research, and I'll give you free speech for the time you need.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. It's good to talk to you again, and I can't wait to be back on the project again with you this summer. And I'm sorry about my poor Italian. I'm still working on it, but hopefully in a while I'll be able to speak to you on Italian in the channel.
But I'm sure you will.
That I'm working on still. But yeah, I'm an archaeologist at the University at Buffalo in New York. I'm doing my dissertation research on the Nuraghic culture in Sardinia. I'm looking at two things with my dissertation research. I'm looking at built space, so settlement patterns and architecture. And then with that, I'm comparing changes in that built space, so comparing changes in architecture and settlement patterns to changes in daily life. So everyday life and the things that people are doing, like cooking, storing things, eating food, serving food, and then also textile production. So that's going to be my main focus of my dissertation. But I have two interesting things to talk about that are kind of like pilot studies for my dissertation.
Ok, so in italiano, per riassumere brevemente, il dottor Griffith, ovviamente io uso il titolo di dottore perché Zach è già laureato, ha fatto la laurea, quello che in Italia è la laurea triennale e gli altri 2 anni quindi la laurea magistrale. In Italia noi diamo il titolo di dottore per chi si laurea, nei paesi anglosassoni in realtà il titolo di dottore viene dato alla fine del dottorato, quindi cioè con il titolo di PhD o PhD. Quindi allo stato attuale la sua ricerca è una ricerca dottorale. Fondamentalmente è un tipo di la cosiddetta landscape archaeology, quindi l'archeologia del paesaggio, e più precisamente sulla distribuzione di siti e la sua relazione con vari tipi di attività. Ad esempio l'ultima che Zach ha citato è quella della produzione tessile, ma non solo, ha citato tutta una serie di esempi nella produzione del cibo e ovviamente le relazioni che intercorrono tra i diversi siti. So Zach, if you want to go with the presentation with the PowerPoint, we can wait.
Yeah. Do you want to give it a couple minutes, or should I get started with it? Whatever you think.
If you want to talk about your experience in Sardinia, I think this will be the second year, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So if you can tell us what do you think, what was your first impression, anything that comes to your mind. What struck you? Like, of course, Nuraghi will be the answer, but really, you have seen like also places alone. I know we had like a couple of messages speaking about places to see, and I gave my best advice for stuff to see around. And I'm really curious because I remember you went to different places, but want to hear also for the other people what you think. People that doesn't know really where is Sardinia, what you can see there, and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, of course, yeah. So, Sardinia. For those of you who don't know about Sardinia or the archaeology there, a lot of Americans, when they talk about Sardinia, they know it for the beaches and the beautiful water. But of course, like you said, the thing that drew me to it was the archaeology and the Nuraghi. And I can't say it enough or explain it in words. The difference between seeing one in person compared to seeing even pictures, videos, or drawings of it, even with all the measurements. When you see them in person, they're so much more impressive and more monumental. And yeah, you really did give me a lot of great ideas of sites to visit when I was there last summer. So it was great to see some of them. Two of the ones that really stuck out to me were hiking up to Tiscali. That was just how remote it was, and being able to go up there and see the remains of the houses that were there. That was fascinating. And then the other one that was a site that haven't seen anything like it before was Romanzezu, if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah, Romanzezu.
Romanzezu. Yeah, just the amount of different like cult or religious related buildings in the area, and then how many different ones that are there. It was great to see. And there's so many questions just from that, at least from that site alone, that I could talk to you about for a long time.
Yeah, it's like I'll pass for a second to Italian. Zach ci parlava della sua esperienza in Sardegna, questo dovrebbe essere il secondo anno, e fondamentalmente il motivo per cui è venuto in Sardegna è un motivo archeologico, sebbene la Sardegna sia conosciuta fondamentalmente per le nostre bellissime spiagge, le acque cristalline, però ovviamente, come ho detto anch'io, i nuraghi sono il motivo che l'ha spinto a visitare da un punto di vista archeologico la nostra isola, e fondamentalmente diceva quanto sia diversa la sensazione che si ha nel visitarli comparata magari a vedere le immagini, vedere i disegni e anche la differenza nelle misure. Molti vedono queste torri, sembrano delle torri abbastanza piccoline, in realtà poi ci si entra dentro, ci sono le scale, poi se si va in posti come Santo Antine, insomma. E tra i due posti che citava, che io avevo consigliato di vedere, Zach ricorda con interesse Tiscali, che probabilmente ci farebbero un film se fosse conosciuta a livello internazionale, perché è un posto stupefacente, e Romanzesu. Ovviamente Tiscali perché è questo villaggio nascosto dentro questa grotta collassata, in mezzo alla natura selvaggia del Supramonte. Romanzesu invece per la grande concentrazione di strutture templari, è un santuario, quindi diverse strutture templari tra loro molto vicine, alcune molto particolari come il famoso labirinto, ma anche basti pensare al pozzo con la scalinata e la parte più in basso con le gradonate. Quindi sicuramente anche uno dei miei preferiti, definitely one of my favorites.
Yeah.
And so you said that you went to Tiscali.
Yes.
I think that one, as I said in Italian, is like a place that can be shown in a movie, and like in apocalypto style of movie, and it will be like amazing. But the striking fact is that is all true. It's no invention. And I think he's maybe in the recent time a bit more known because I've seen TikToks and pictures going around on Facebook about that written in English.
Yeah.
So maybe in the future that will be one of the most famous sites in Sardinia, possibly. But speaking about your research,
Yes.
you have seen different places in Sardinia. So your research, I guess, is not only focused on a narrow like place, a narrow aerial. So how you started to like focusing on this idea? So why landscape archaeology? Why you didn't focus on other stuff? That's my question.
Yeah, so the main thing with the landscape perspective, what we can do is get an understanding of like the great variability of what the sites have and what there is on the island. One of the things that really stood out to me, just looking at the Nuraghi and especially visiting a lot of them, is the great amount of variability between them. So, like one example that comes to mind is like from where we were working in Sidi, the Nuraghi there are in a completely different form than a lot of the Nuraghi in other places, just because of the variability. So, and that alone, as well as the like differences in the raw material used to build them. One of the ones that sticks out to me, at least with the raw material, is right next to Calgary, Nuraghi Antagori, which
Okay.
looks over the Gulf.
Yep.
The stone that they use, I believe it was some kind of granite. So just the whole structure itself in that area, it just looks completely different, not only because of how they're built, but also the stones. So I think using that landscape perspective helps you get to see more of that variability and try to figure out like why there is so much of it as well.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing. Also because in South Sardinia, especially along the coast, we have like different nuraghi. I think about the Sarabus area, so southeast, and nuraghi are like smaller. Usually, they like build them around rocks, huge rocks or rocky formations, and they are like very intriguing and nice. It's an Antigori in Sarroch is a nice example. Has have these towers around the rocky peak,
Yeah,
and has this marvelous entrance that was excavated a few years ago and just screams like Mycenaean entrance of
yeah,
some sort. So in italiano ho chiesto a Zach quale fosse il motivo per cui lui ha scelto questo tema, quello dell'archeologia del paesaggio, quindi l'approccio, le motivazioni che l'hanno spinto verso questo approccio piuttosto che verso un altro tema. E fondamentalmente l'idea è proprio questa diversità che si vede nel paesaggio tra i diversi nuraghi, perché non tutti i nuraghi sono simili. Anche ovviamente ci sono i protonuraghi, i nuraghi a torre, ma anche all'interno delle categorie, come ad esempio dei nuraghi a torre, vediamo grandi differenze. Lui, ad esempio, faceva l'esempio, scusate il gioco di parole, di Antigori di Sarroch, dove effettivamente ci sono queste torri perimetrali, praticamente sul dirupo, e poi questa entrata più in basso, mastodontica, che vagheggiando così con la mente arriccheggia quasi l'entrata di Micene per questa imponenza che ha, però ovviamente è un paragone risibile. Adesso chiederei a Zach di presentare proprio tutto quanto il PowerPoint che ci ha mostrato qui in copertina. So Zach, if you want to explain to us your research through this PowerPoint, we will be amazed to listen to you.
thanks. Yeah, thank you so much. So this PowerPoint is the project that I worked on with my brother, Caden Griffith, who's also at the Department of Anthropology at the University at Buffalo. And what we did here is try to look at landscape preferences, for different types of settlements, different types of sites in Sardinia. So the main thing that we wanted to answer is this big question of why sites are located in certain areas and why people settled in certain areas. There's a little bit of a limitation of this, like what we talked about before with the idea of variability between the sites. Even though we have an idea of a typology of nuraghe, which can be classified as a corridor or a single tower, it doesn't do justice to the amount of variability within them, and even interregionally. So that's something that I want to look at being able to expand in the future, looking at subsections of the region, but subsections of Sardinia to see if the landscape preferences might be different within them. But what I have here is using the typology that we do have to look at why people place the sites in certain places in Sardinia.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah.
Quindi riassumendo brevemente per gli spettatori italiani, questo tipo di approccio è proprio basato sulla diversità di monumenti e il perché questi monumenti siano diversi. Ovviamente noi sappiamo che ci sono i protonuraghi, i nuraghi a torre, l'abbiamo già detto, però è anche vero che la diversità poi delle strutture, cioè queste semplici apparenti distinzioni, non rendono merito, come diceva, alla grande variabilità. Effettivamente poi ci si trova un po' in disaccordo, a volte un po' anche limitati nel definire certi nuraghi esclusivamente protonuraghe, perché non ha il classico sviluppo del nuraghe a torre. Quindi sono assolutamente d'accordo con questa ricerca, che è affascinante, e mi piacerà sicuramente in futuro vederne gli sviluppi. L'altra cosa ovviamente è che questo tipo di approccio che si estende sull'intera Sardegna poi richiede un caso più specifico o comunque dei casi più specifici. Zach parlava di questi areali più ridotti in cui puoi focalizzare l'attenzione.
Thank you.
Continue.
Okay. So yeah, like I said, what we're trying to answer is, or at least trying to get some more questions about, is this question of why people settled where they did in Nuraghe, Sardinia. So to examine this, what I did is use a theory and a method, which what we refer to as settlement ecology. And what this does is it allowed us to examine how Nuraghe communities weighed different economic priorities when choosing where to build their sites. So the three that I looked at on the screen there are agricultural suitability, access to geological resources, and then extra-insular trade and interaction. And I'll go into some of the ways that we quantified these different variables.
Ok, sempre in italiano, la ricerca si basa fondamentalmente su questi 3 punti, che non è solo una ricerca di tipo architettonico, perché quella è l'evidenza delle differenze che sussistono, ma fondamentalmente si basa su un approccio di tipo economico. Ovviamente non posso non citare il fratello di Zach, che invece è nel dipartimento di antropologia di Buffalo. Zach invece, I presume the department is different, like archaeology and anthropology for your brother, isn't it?
Here our department, anthropology, the subsection of that we both work in is archaeology.
Ok, no, stesso dipartimento. Ovviamente in America c'è una piccola differenza, non hanno il dipartimento di beni culturali come magari in Italia, ma per questioni anche di tipo, come dire, per il fatto che in America ci sia stato un tipo di sviluppo anche diverso, ad esempio la presenza dei nativi americani, quindi la possibilità di vedere direttamente come si scheggiava ad esempio la pietra, tutte queste cose ha creato una leggera differenza tra lo sviluppo delle diverse scuole e ovviamente l'approccio, almeno in America, parte sempre più o meno da un indirizzo antropologico e poi declina in quello archeologico. Quindi Zach citava il lavoro che sta facendo suo fratello ugualmente su questo tema, e l'altro secondo punto era, oltre che la sostenibilità da un punto di vista della crescita, quindi agricolo, anche l'accesso alle risorse geologiche e la possibilità di effettuare interazioni extrainsulari. Quindi io penso subito ad Antigori, perché ovviamente nel Golfo di Cagliari, messo lì, bello, pronto ad accogliere o per partire con le navi. So I was mentioning the fact that Antigori is clearly like in that location, looking at the Gulf, possibly for these extra insular trades and interactions.
Absolutely, that's something that we can get into a little bit with how it maps out on the map. But it is an example of a site that has this Mycenaean fineware, or at least if some of it is imitation Mycenaean pottery. That's a very interesting example of a site that it's located in this area that has a great harbor. It's close to the coast, so because of its location there, maybe the people who built it are prioritizing these different things.
Yeah, sure.
So on the methodological side, what we did was use this method called settlement ecology. So what it does is it asks this question of why people settle in a given place at a given time. So what it does is it allows settlement data and environmental data to be integrated with integrated together to determine which landscapes people may have prioritized or avoided in prehistory. So Sardinia, specifically Nuragic, the Nuragic culture is a great, it's an ideal data set and an ideal laboratory for this type of study because of the amount of sites that we have documented and how far-reaching over the entire island they're documented. And then the other thing that's very great about the island is that it's a very heterogeneous landscape. So because of the mountains, the hills, the valleys, the plains, as well as the different resources in the landscape, so the copper especially, as well as obsidian, and then the different harbors as well, it can allow us to look at a map with a lot of different factors, and we can think of that as different ways for why people were settling in this environment.
Surely. Sempre in italiano, il fatto comunque che la Sardegna sia così eterogenea da un punto di vista geologico, passiamo da lagune, paludi, montagne con diversi tipi di rocce, crea questa diversità che la rende anche un laboratorio di studio estremamente interessante. E quindi Zach spiegava il perché, cioè quali sono le motivazioni, probabilmente sulla base di questa diversità, queste motivazioni del perché loro abbiano scelto diversi approcci nell'insediare il territorio. Quindi si sviluppa la ricerca in questa direzione. Please.
Yeah. So next, what I have is some of the examples of different resources that we were able to map into the landscape. So looking at the metal, so looking at copper and then silver and lead. Copper usually occurs all across the island, usually in the more hilly and mountainous regions, but we were able to map the locations of these sources based on different geological references in the literature. The same thing with silver and lead as well. And then one of the interesting things as well about Sardinia, at least in prehistory, from various different literature reviews, is the different types of harbors and what harbors might have been suitable in prehistory. So what we tried to do is map some of the more suitable ones that would have allowed for easy access for people coming into the island, so from other places to be able to moor and dock boats. So those are some of the ones that we selected in the middle. And just because of the conditions of the Tyrrhenian Sea and then the strait between Sardinia and Corsica, there's been a lot of arguments that those were less, the coasts there are a little bit less accessible. So because of those reasons, we see those harbors being preferenced. But these are some of the factors we looked at, as well as other ones such as the geology and the elevation. And together we could put that together to create a map of what the landscape would be like.
Sure. Sempre in italiano, i tipi di risorse di cui parlavamo prima, quindi riassunti poi in questa slide, la presenza di miniere di rame, la presenza di siti possibilmente utilizzabili da un punto di vista portuale. Non immaginatevi porti in pietra come nei periodi successivi, semplicemente da un punto di vista topografico, le aree più appetibili per accogliere dei natanti e comunque poi avere accesso libero all'entroterra e ovviamente anche la presenza di altri tipi di miniere come miniere di piombo e argento rendono come dire il quadro può essere rappresentato partendo già da questi colori, potremmo dire, da questi elementi di partenza con cui puoi dipingere e rappresentare perché loro abbiano scelto determinate località per inserire i siti. So please just
Yeah. So what we have next now, I won't take too much time on it, but just a brief description of some of the terminology that we'll be talking about. So on the left, what I have is a just approximate timeline of when the earliest dates for different types of nuragi were constructed. So this is, again, it's looking at it typologically, but what this allows us to do is look at least a little bit of Gyeonggi over time and at least when these different types of sites are being constructed, which we'll look at in a little bit. And then on the right is the table showing our different types of sites. So you can see the vast majority of sites that we have are nuragi. And then other types of sites are a little bit limited. So settlements, that's specifically referring to villages. Giants' tombs are those monumental mortuary structures. Sanctuaries, this one is a little bit more diverse. So it's including all different types of cult sites. So sanctuaries, water temples, Megaron temples as well. So that's a little bit of a larger category with a diverse group of things, but it's all mapped into that same category. And yeah, in total, it's over 10,000 sites that we mapped onto the island.
I'll just give, ovviamente questa è una slide necessaria soprattutto per chi non ha presente cosa siano i nuraghi, i protonuraghi, i nuraghi complessi, le tombe dei giganti, i santuari, però fondamentalmente è sempre utile per dare un'idea sia da un punto di vista cronologico che tipologico, quindi i diversi tipi di monumenti e soprattutto per altri tipi di monumenti che non siano strettamente nuraghi come le tombe dei giganti e i santuari, che a volte sono anche un po' più difficili da declinare perché ci sono santuari dove magari ci sono i pozzi sacri e le fonti, ci sono altri santuari dove ci sono i megara, ci sono santuari che hanno tutto quanto, quindi è sempre un po' difficile. Riassunti così, come santuari è più semplice e ovviamente nella tabella vengono mostrati gli esempi di nuraghi a corridoio, quanti ce ne sono, nuraghi a torre singola, complessi poi misti come li conosciamo e siti comunque anche scomparsi o non classificati per arrivare poi a un totale ragguardevole di più di 10.000 siti.
So this is the way that we mapped our economic preferences onto the landscape. So if you see the map on the right, it's cluttered with some random points there. But what we did with those points is using a GIS software we developed, we generated 10,000 random points. And what we did with that is to model what random placement would be like. So we modeled these random points and then we compared what the actual placement would be like using different statistical tests. Notably, the one that we focused on was a chi-squared goodness of fit test to try to observe if what we see differs from the random. And then you can see some of the factors that we use to test for agricultural suitability, trade and interaction, and resource extraction. And what we use those for, the primary archaeological correlates, we use those to create different catchments. And you can see those in the different colors on the map. So one that you should take notice of is that bottom one, catchment 16. This is the one that has harbors, copper, silver, lead, and then also more likely to have agriculturally suitable land. So you can see some examples of that in the map there. It's going to be in a darker green, but that's one that has all of the economic priorities. But we look at these priorities and where people are in the landscape based on these priorities.
That's really interesting. Sempre in italiano, questo è proprio uno dei primi risultati che dà questa operazione apparentemente semplice di combinare questi diversi elementi iniziali di cui parlavamo e tramite un software GIS, quindi Geographic Information System, che mette insieme i diversi rapporti tra le cose, come ad esempio quello che stiamo parlando, di cui discutevamo prima, l'agricoltura, la presenza di porti, la presenza di siti minerari, e già mischiando o comunque permettendo di incrociare questi dati si ottiene questa rappresentazione, che è una cosa assolutamente affascinante, perché uno ottiene matematicamente in maniera precisa un quadro effettivo dei rapporti che ci sono fra questi elementi da un punto di vista topografico. That's really interesting. Like,
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really interested in discussing it more with you because, especially when we go into the results, it'll be cool to look at. So here's the results section as we're getting into it. So this should be a lot more interesting than some of the background data stuff. But the first thing that I have is the Nuraghi. When we group all Nuraghi together, so all the different subtypes together, what we have are some very striking data. So when grouped together, all the Nuraghi show a statistically significant preference for catchment 16. So that's that dark green catchment there that has all of the economic priorities. So the agricultural land, the copper, silver, and lead, and then also the harbors. And they select that far above the random. So the random in Sardinia, it's only about 1.8% of the landscape, but 8.8% of the Nuraghi are located. So we have a pretty clear suggestion there that they do prefer these different types of environments, and they're also strongly preferring a combined amount of them as well. So that's one thing that's very striking. The other thing is that the individual values as well. So agricultural land, copper, silver, lead, and harbors are all preferred above the random as well. And then another thing that some other scholars has talked about is the elevation. So where the Nuraghi sit in the landscape, and this what they say we find as well. So that most Nuraghi seem to be located in the Midlands zone. So we defined it between 200 and 500 meters of elevation, which seems to be fitting. And then the highlands, they seem to select against. So they seem to avoid against very high locations in the landscape. So not in mountainous areas, and more likely to be in the more lower elevation plateaus or the hills. And then another interesting thing is with that modern non-irrigated cropland, that last one. This is a measurement that iLongo uses in a publication in 2015, and arguing that this modern use of land can be related to older practices of agriculture, and we find results that show that as well, at least with the Nuraghi, showing that they preferred this type of land as well.
All right. So that's really striking. Sempre in italiano, fondamentalmente da questa combinazione di dati di cui si parlava prima, risulta evidente poi da questa immagine come il numero 16, quindi il colore verde scuro, cioè la combinazione di tutti i diversi elementi, abbia una preferenza statistica, e questa cosa la si può confrontare anche con il dato, ad esempio, random, quindi casuale, che invece ricorre molto di meno. Quindi questa è la dimostrazione fondamentalmente visiva, ma anche matematica e statistica, di come i monumenti non siano posizionati casualmente nel paesaggio, che già di per sé è importante, dà poi il via a una serie di considerazioni, e come anche a livello di altitudine, come già citavano altri autori, come diceva il dottor Griffith, ci sia una preferenza per l'insediamento dei monumenti tra i 200 e i 500 metri, evitando spesso quelle che sono le montagne più alte, in cui evidentemente non avevano nessun interesse da un punto di vista economico, cosa che invece avrebbe motivato di più la posizione di, ad esempio, delle fortezze per l'avvistamento. Quindi questo tipo di evidenza dimostra più come i monumenti siano integrati nel paesaggio e siano scelte i luoghi di edificazione allo scopo, come dire, economico, quindi di sfruttamento del territorio. That's really cool.
Thanks. Yeah. So, and then the results are even more different when we look at them between different types of Nuraghi. So using the typology, different types show very different preferences as well. So the earliest dates that we have for Nuraghi are from what's either described as corridor or proto-Nuraghi or pseudo-Nuraghi. I'll use the term corridor Nuraghi to describe them, but within this term, within the earliest types of Nuraghi, we see an avoidance of the economic factors. So there's a very, very distinct avoidance of catchment 16 and all three economic factors. So they don't seem to be located in agriculturally suitable land as often. They don't seem to be located as often near metals, and they don't seem to be as often located near the harbors as well. There can be a lot of different reasons for this, but they're not preferring these over the natural distribution in the landscape. The second type that we look at are the mixed complex nuraghi. So that's on the right. This is a strange category. It doesn't have a lot in this category, but what it has is it includes nuraghi that have the corridor form, so some kind of a platform or corridor nuraghi that also has more towers built onto it as well. And this strange category seems to follow that patterns of the corridor nuraghi. So they also don't seem to prefer any of the economic factors that we looked at. Single tower nuraghi and complex nuraghi, they do seem to follow the overall pattern for nuraghi when they're all grouped together. So both of our middle ones are prioritizing all of the economic factors, and the complex types, more than any other type, fall within that catchment number 16. So 9.9% of them are located in that. And that's the one that has, once again, agriculturally suitable land, metals, and harbors. So it is interesting that these more elaborate farms are located in these like prime economic locations.
And also makes sense as they are the more developed ones. So it's really interesting about the difference between corridor nuraghi and also mixed complex nuraghi, most likely because the mixed category starts with a proto nuraghi. So maybe it's because of that. So I reckon something like this was written also by Mauro Perra about the Nuraghi Arruvio plateau, comparing the position of the single towers to the one of the corridor nuraghi. Like the corridor nuraghi seems more like located in passage points and stuff like that. So I'll translate in Italian. Questa scheda è veramente interessante perché mostra una differenza sostanziale nell'insediamento che si può evidenziare, ad esempio, tra i nuraghi a corridoio e i nuraghi a torre semplice o i nuraghi complessi, con proprio una... ovviamente poi c'è un'altra categoria che è quella dei nuraghi misti, che solitamente sono nuraghi che iniziano come un nuraghi a corridoio e poi si sviluppano le torri, quindi per questo motivo sono su Mulino di Villanova Franca può essere un esempio. E io adesso mi chiedevo se questo non sia perché comunque partendo dalla base del protonuraghe l'evidenza che viene mostrata, cioè che i nuraghi a corridoio e i nuraghi misti non sembrano così tanto interessarsi a questo convergere di diversi elementi di sfruttamento, cosa che invece fanno i nuraghi a torre singola e i nuraghi complessi, che sono poi lo sviluppo dei nuraghi a torre singola, ma ancora di più perché sono lo sviluppo, oltre che architettonico, anche da un punto di vista cronologico, perché i nuraghi complessi sono la vetta massima dello sviluppo dei nuraghi. Quindi per quanto riguarda i nuraghi complessi, proprio si raggiunge la percentuale maggiore di questo ricorrere di elementi per effettuare questo tipo di sfruttamento economico, che invece, ad esempio, nei nuraghi a torre singola sì c'è, ma non in maniera così elevata. That's extremely interesting.
Thanks. Yeah, and like what you said, one of the things going into it, reading like publications like what Mauro Perra published about the settlement patterns, that's something on that other studies looking at plateaus or a sub-regional scale have observed. So we tried to see how that would look on the scale of the whole island. So the next thing that I'll talk about are the other types of sites that we looked at. So the settlements or the villages, and then the sanctuaries or any of these religious sites, and then the giants' tombs. The giants' tombs follow a pattern that you'll recognize from a lot of discussions in various publications. They seem to be located where the settlements in the nuraghi are. So they're located very close, and the patterns follow them almost exactly, actually, the patterns that we see in the nuraghi, which makes sense with some of the ideas that we have about that. But the settlements as well, so these villages mirror the nuraghi pattern as well. So they also prioritize all three economic factors, but they seem to be more located near the coasts and then towards the lowlands as well, which is what we expect. They also avoid the mountainous areas too.
What about the sanctuaries?
The sanctuaries are the biggest outlier. So there's been some discussion of sanctuaries in the literature as well, and these patterns seem to follow them. So they're located in the highlands, so the highest elevation areas, and they show no preference for any of the analyzed economic variables. They actually avoid them as well. So even though they are actually located in more what we would expect to be mountainous areas, which have these metal resources, they seem to avoid them. So because of that, we can make the argument that they're clearly set in marginal landscapes.
That's really interesting, as you have like a series of examples going in one direction and then another one like completely on the other side. If my like humble opinion, I think also because sanctuaries seem, I think about the Megara sites like Gennepruna in Irgoli, Sazedes os Carros, even Romanzesu could be, like they are often on places of passage. So as you said, the fact that even if they're like on high places could be for that reason. I reckon that somebody have
Hello?
Okay, I'm back. Somebody has done a comparison between the position of the Megara with the one of the passage lines of the transhumance.
Yeah.
So extremely interesting. I'll say it briefly in Italian. La cosa interessante da questa slide, oltre al fatto che come sarebbe lecito aspettarsi, gli insediamenti seguono più o meno in modo abbastanza preciso quello dei nuraghi, soprattutto nei nuraghi a torre singola e dei complessi, con una preferenza per la costa. Le tombe dei giganti ovviamente seguono pedissequamente il posizionamento dei nuraghi, come è lecito aspettarsi e come molti autori scrivono, ma la cosa più interessante è che i santuari invece no. Si discostano da queste, come dire, da questo pattern ricorrente e anzi sembrano proprio evitare l'incrociarsi di questi diversi fattori economici, con anzi una preferenza per i punti più elevati. Io suggerivo forse anche per questioni di spostamenti, io penso sempre ai Megara come quello di Esterzili o Gennepruna di Irgoli, quindi è estremamente interessante come risultato. Extremely interesting results.
Yeah, thanks. And something that I think is interesting now that we can talk about, I'd love to hear your insight into it as well as what some of these patterns mean. So I'll talk about one of them first, and one of them that this could help give some insight into is the function of the nuraghi. I know you've probably discussed this a lot on the channel a little bit about this big question, at least sometimes of what the nuraghi are. So this
is one of the questions right now on the channel. It's like we don't have like a magical globe for understanding this stuff. Studies like this can give us some hints about where to focus our thoughts.
Yeah.
Sorry for the interruption.
No, yeah. So like what you said, a lot of the arguments can be all over the place. So whether they're houses of like elites or chiefs, or if they're religious sites, or if they're houses of ordinary people, or if they're watchtowers, or they could have a combination of all these different factors in them, or different ones could have these different functions as well. That's like an ongoing debate that's going on, and a lot of people have a lot of opinions. But one thing that this data does show is that the placement of the nuraghi is very similar to what we see in the placement of villages. So if we know that villages are these residential sites, nuraghi are located in the same areas as them, but they even more strongly select for these economic preferences. So because of that, this could further the argument that at least some of them or many of these nuraghi could have functioned as residential structures.
Okay, just summarizing in Italian, just a bit. Come è anche stato chiesto proprio adesso da uno degli spettatori, qual è la funzione di nuraghi, a cosa servivano, erano delle fortezze o erano case dell'aristocrazia? Beh, noi archeologi non abbiamo la sfera di cristallo, quindi non possiamo dire servivano a quello, servivano a quello. Semplicemente questo tipo di studi, e questo è un bellissimo esempio, aiutano a definire in che direzione orientare la ricerca, o almeno la risposta possibile che si può dare, invece che dire semplicemente erano questo sulla base, non lo so, della struttura, di varie idee, dei rinvenimenti. Qua si approccia un tipo di spiegazione, di ragionamento di tipo statistico, cioè sulla base della posizione, dell'evidenza, della localizzazione di diversi siti, dall'incrocio di queste diverse evidenze. Ad esempio, il dottor Griffith ci mostrava in questa slide, ovviamente molto riassunta, molto semplice, l'intersezione di questi 3 cerchi, che sono la presenza del porto, o comunque di un sito, di un golfo, di un sito appetibile da un punto di vista portuale per gli scambi, la presenza dei siti minerari e la presenza delle risorse dello sfruttamento agricolo, o comunque agropastorale. E l'intersezione di queste almeno 3 cose mostra poi la posizione preferenziale di alcuni tipi di nuraghi che abbiamo esposto prima. Quindi, come in una materia scientifica, o comunque che ha l'ardire di definirsi scientifica, non si può dare una risposta, come dire, basata su sentimenti, la nostra idea personale, ma bisogna partire dai dati. I dati sono quelli che ci ha mostrato, cioè le prime cose. Ci sono queste risorse, ci sono questi siti, vediamo cosa succede incrociando le 2 cose insieme e vediamo cosa ne otteniamo. E il fatto che poi ci siano dei siti come quelli cultuali che si discostano da questa roba è estremamente interessante, perché dimostra, almeno a mio vedere, il fatto che i nuraghi e i villaggi seguono questo tipo di strategia. So I'll just summarize what I was saying about the answer some people has done on the chat, and the importance of your work and all the works that start with evidence and not from the conclusions, as some people does. Like, I mean, big question what they were made for, but I think is the wrong answer.
Yeah, it is.
And your approach is more like scientific than many others I have seen during my studies. So please continue. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, no. So that was you, like what you said there is a perfect point. What we're trying to do is we're not trying to say these are residential structures or something like that. What we're trying to say is the patterns that they follow the patterns of the villages. So because of that, we can raise a whole lot more questions about what they might actually be. But yeah, the second thing that we can talk about with these results as well is the differences between the types of nuraghi. So what we have with the corridor and the mixed complex nuraghi compared to the single tower and the complex nuraghi, the differences in the priorities are very striking. So just to go over it again, the corridor and the mixed complex, they don't seem to prioritize any of these economic variables. And then the single tower and the complex nuraghi really do seem to prioritize them. So there's a couple reasons that this might be, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too as well. But one reason that these variables might not be prioritized is just because because they could be earlier forms of the nuraghi. So maybe the people didn't need to prioritize these different factors. That could also have to do with the settlement of the landscape. So if we're seeing a smaller population inhabiting Sardinia, especially like what we see with the nuraghi on the landscape, if the nuraghi the concept of what building nuraghi is, if that starts in one smaller area and then later spreads out to the rest of the island, you would see later on as the landscape gets filled up, these different economic factors have to be prioritized because there's more people, there's more building on the landscape. So that could be another reason. So it could be that the earlier forms, or it could be that later on priorities might have shifted, or simply that the landscape got filled in.
I mean, all the points are good. I mean, from what I can tell, I think
Yeah.
the Protonuragi have like a reminiscence of previous Copper Age structures that were mainly made for defensive purposes, and this thing maybe with time goes less and less and less. And as you said, perfectly good point. The landscape is so filled with structures, and they surely have started to prioritize and selecting where to put them. I mean, there are, as you said, a number of reasons why they have chosen of doing this. Difficult answer. We really don't know why, but the evidence of this stuff is like demonstrating from my viewpoint that they were made for that reason. I mean, reason in terms of following the village, and most likely also the giant's tomb or giant's grave follows the nurage. I don't know if they were made like for all the people. Regarding the giant's tomb, if the giant's tombs are made for all the people of the village, that's another question.
Yeah.
We are not going to answer it.
Yeah.
But no worries. The light is good. Definitely. I guess there is some like the Protonuragi seems like more related to the control of the territory in the early stages.
Yeah.
Is something many scholars have argued about, if they were built in the very beginning or during all the time or just in the end. I guess Lilio and the first ideas were like the last Nuragi made, then he changes his ideas. So I think I can not say more about that. It's just striking all this evidence coming together, and sure. I mean, we still cannot say why they were made for, but surely it has some economic reasons.
Yeah.
Of what type? I don't know.
Don't know.
But that's really interesting. Sorry, please continue.
Yeah. So the last point that I'll talk about on this slide is the idea of logistical mobility. So this is an idea of like how people are moving in the landscape to access different resources. So when we modeled Nuragi and villages in the landscape, what we see is that most of them sit within 20 kilometers of different resources. So 20 kilometers of metal within harbors, or so the different resources like that. So what this could suggest is a pattern of logistical mobility, because they do sit within 20 kilometers, but a very few of them sit within 5 kilometers. So they seem to be about a day's journey within a lot of these economic resources, but they're not right on top of them. So what this could suggest is that like the Nuragi and the villages, what we're seeing a lot with them, especially the Nuragi, these could be places where people are acquiring resources from, but it's not directly the sites of extraction. So what we might expect to see in these places by mines, whether they're copper or silver mines, or by the harbors as well, are smaller types of settlements or even resource extraction areas that we don't see yet, at least in our data set. Because if you think of people going to mine somewhere, they're not going to spend the whole day walking there, do a little bit of work and come back. They're probably doing something at that location.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So I just said some of these things before, so I will not translate it again in Italian. But definitely you have some points about this stuff. I mean, uh, there are a couple of examples of nuraghi extremely close together,
Yeah.
and then the resources are, as other studies, as we have seen in other studies, is always like 1 day of work,
Yeah.
more or less. So just it's nice to see that all the different studies are converging together in the same direction, and not just everybody proposing a different idea without proper evidence about that. So please just continue. It's extremely interesting.
So the next thing I'll talk about very quickly is just the idea of land use. So the ways that people use the land in the past. And what we see again with this is a striking difference between the corridor and the mixed complex nuraghi compared to all the other types of nuraghi as well as the settlements. So if you see what we have there with agricultural suitability, the corridor and mixed complex nuraghi don't seem to select for land that we label as agriculturally suitable, but all the other types do. So like what we talked about more, there could be a lot of reasons for this. It could be because of various different reasons, not only having to do with land use in like agriculture or pastoralism. It could also have to do with things like defensiveness or where these earlier Copper Age sites might have been. But the second thing that's interesting, our second variable for land use we looked at was modern examples of non-irrigated agricultural land. So, and what we have here is very different actually. So the nuraghi are they very much preference this type of land, which is now agriculturalists don't need to irrigate that land, while the settlements are located more in land that we would see would have irrigation. So there could be a couple of reasons for this. So, but one of the reasons that might stick out is different ideas of land use, in that the people in the settlements, they might be growing things in a different way than people who are living near or around a nuraghi.
Yeah, I think the help of archaeobotanists will be very, very helpful. So, just quickly in Italian, qua vengono mostrate quelle che sono chiamati land use, quindi l'uso del territorio, ovviamente da un punto di vista agricolo, che differisce sostanzialmente dall'uso moderno, perché noi abbiamo macchinari, abbiamo sistemi di irrigazione complessi, tutta una serie di altre cose, e ovviamente i siti ovviamente non più di tanto, i siti nuragici mostrano una preferenza per un tipo di agricoltura che non richiede l'irrigazione, come sarebbe anche lecito aspettarsi. Quindi sì, se non sbaglio, if I don't remember wrong, if I'm not wrong, I think that something like this was also mentioned in a book about that came out in 2014 about an archaeology professor in North Sardinia, and he was giving some numbers about the FAO ratings about land use. I will search for that and but it's just I mean, it's overkill. You're already showing extremely good data. It's just for bibliography.
That'd be really helpful to see. Yeah.
So please continue. No worries about my interruption.
Oh, no, yeah. So the last thing that I'll touch on again is just the differences between what we might classify as sacred types of space. So with our mortuary structures, the giants' tombs that we look at, compared to the other types of sacred space, if we are classifying both mortuary structures and sanctuaries as sacred or cultic spaces, which you could make the argument that you can, especially because the forecourts of the giants' tombs, there might be some kinds of rituals going on there, having to do with feasting or rituals for the dead as well. So where we have these different spiritual associated rituals, there's very, very big contrast. So like what we said before, the sanctuaries are located in these set away spaces that don't prioritize any of the economic factors, all the giant tombs are located where the people probably were living. So by the settlements, by these giant tombs. So yeah, what we see there is a very different sacred sites and deliberate contrast between these different types of sites. And because of that, we might be able to say things about the cosmology. If we're stretching it a little bit, we can make some arguments about the cosmology in terms of where the ideas of death are. The ideas of death are close to the people, while these other associations are farther away. But the problem with that, though, is that in some of these sanctuaries, there are villages next to them. So it could be a little bit complicated with that, but at least the idea of the domain of the dead being located near where people are living is something that is something that a lot of people, especially like Blake and Para, like Mauro has talked about a lot. So that's something that was good to see here as well.
Exactly. I'm just adding a few words. I'm sure that anthropologists will be more than happy of giving interpretations about this part, but maybe it's also because, if I remember correctly, some scholars like De Palmas proposed that giant tombs were like substituted by the water sanctuaries over time. So it's like the part dedicated to the cults is shifting from something more like narrow and restricted to some people, to something that goes with a much bigger number of people. And this shifting from also the place where this was happening, I mean, very close to the village or very far from the village, seems like an evolution in terms of complexity of the society, and possibly also chronologically. So even if we know that sanctuaries are dated also around the time of constructions of some nuragi, but more or less the majority will be like in the end of the Bronze Age or a bit earlier. So yeah, I mean, it's extremely interesting. I will try to ask you if there is also the second PowerPoint to show. We don't have like so much time. I don't want to sacrifice a good exposition of the PowerPoint, just rushing for seeing everything. So I'll let you. Is 13/14 slides, so I will leave you to the last one.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. Yeah. So just some conclusions about like what we see there. One of the main things is that Nuragi communities, they seem to make specific economic decisions when choosing to build their sites. So especially the sites that might be residential sites, they seem to select for farmlands, metals, and trade. And then we also can potentially see clear diachronic shifts from avoidance of earlier types to a strong preference later on. We also can see this diachronic shifts, like you said, with the giant tombs and sanctuaries, and can tell us a lot about society and what people are prioritizing when they're building it. But yeah, that's what I have to talk about. Thanks.
Is extremely interesting. Thank you very much. I don't think I have anything to add about this great example of how scientific research needs to be done. So thank you very much, Zach. I will try to ask you if there is any chance of presenting also the other PowerPoint, of maybe is too much stuff compressed. And let's see. Yeah, it's 22 slides. So I don't know if you want to present it another time. I will be delighted of have you guest another time here.
Yeah.
Or if you just prefer to answer to some questions that people has done on the chat, and leave the PowerPoint for another time. Just tell me your preference.
Yeah, I think definitely going over some of the questions would be great. I'd like to hear what people are thinking, and then there's so much more I'd like to talk to you about with everything that's going on. So
I will really like. I mean, I would like to end until midnight, but
yeah,
here in Italy is already 11 p.m. So it's a bit extreme for all the viewers. Even if we have like 13 viewers right now, and it's not bad for. I mean, a scientific presentation. There's nothing really. One question, even if it's not super like fit to your research,
yeah,
but somehow it can be considered. So let's say, how much does it cost in terms of resources or coins for the time? Let's say coins, but
yeah.
to build a nuraghe or other buildings typical of this frame period. I would say said is not extremely like in team with the presentation, but maybe can be approached from your perspective.
Yeah, that's something I know a lot of people have talked about before, with how these structures are being constructed, and it's going to take a very long time. I read something that talked about estimated man hours for production. I think it was by Webster. I think Webster in 1991 published something about estimated manpower for a single tower nuraghe. And he said something like, I could be wrong about this, but he said something about a single tower nuraghe could have taken a group of 4 people either like 50 to 100 years to make. So if
Wow.
4 people. So if we're thinking about how many people are needed to make something, it's going to be a lot of people, probably a lot of people, and they're also going to spend probably several months building it.
But is somehow is like in team as people that build stuff need to be fed, to be like they need water, they need to work on that. So extremely, my point of view, specialistic kind of work. As there was the hypothesis that randomly people, by some authors, not by the most recent, I'll say, that people randomly started building nuraghe out of nowhere for no reasons, but it's really clear that they had some big architectural skills for doing like these spiral ladders and all the other stuff we have seen in the different examples. Let's think about, I don't know, I always came up with Santo Antine, but also is a Paras of Isili is extremely tall chamber, like 11 meters. So it's nothing people that has no experience on this can build. So in a sense, these people needed resources, like to be fed. They needed food, and they were doing that for a number of days, if not months or years. So before doing the building, that is the last thing we see, the last evidence on the landscape. They had, before of that, the resources. So maybe they chose the position based on that. But not only for building, also for controlling, let's say. So I would like to hear your point, if is before the egg or the chicken, if is the needing of resources for building this stuff, or is just for controlling this stuff. It's a bit tricky question. I don't know if I'll pose it in the correct way.
I think you did. And it's definitely a really big question of like whether the resources allowed these people to build these things, or they built them so that they can take advantage of the resources. And Yeah. It's a hard thing to say, but
for me it seems that they were trying to controlling it. Also based on the other studies I have seen about the visibility of the tower. The tower can see far away, but also can be seen. So it's like a way of saying, we are here, so you're not coming here and taking our resources freely. And I think that the interaction between these two studies can give also a possible answer about this question that I mean, it always will be like partially answered.
Yeah.
But maybe it can come out some interesting ideas out of this question, more than my humble hypothesis that I just made it right now. So ovviamente I need to translate in Italian. Ho chiesto al dottor Griffith la domanda che era stata posta, cioè quanto costava in termini di risorse o di monete, sempre tra virgolette, costruire un nuraghe. Il dottor Griffith ha riportato una citazione. It was Tycott or Webster di Webster, che ha scavato il famoso Duas Nuragas di Borore, che aveva più o meno fatto una statistica, aveva dato alcuni numeri sulla presenza di 4 o 5 persone relativo alla costruzione ovviamente di un monumento tra virgolette semplice come un nuraghe, una torre singola, che avrebbe richiesto tra i 400 e i 500 anni per essere costruito, che ovviamente non è poco, anche perché pone poi problemi in termini di continuità, anche se è vero che conosciamo alcuni nuraghi non finiti, some unfinished nuraghi. But the point is, la domanda che io ho posto a questo punto è sì, questi nuraghi sono stati costruiti in queste diverse zone, ma sono stati costruiti perché c'erano le risorse e quindi sono una conseguenza della presenza delle risorse, o che è un po' come dire, è nato prima l'uovo alla gallina, li hanno costruiti per controllare le risorse, che è lo stesso tema, ma posto in una prospettiva leggermente diversa. E dottor Griffith ha risposto che sembrano esserci evidenze relative al fatto che queste risorse ovviamente, cioè come posso metterla senza attribuire una mia idea al pensiero del dottor Griffith, cioè fondamentalmente non potremmo mai dare una risposta certa a questa cosa, però possiamo magari porre delle domande per fare in modo che questo tipo di domanda venga risposta in futuro. Ad esempio, con gli studi della visibilità e dell'intervisibilità dei nuraghi, perché il nuraghe si vede a distanza, a una certa area, che è stata anche studiata in alcuni casi. Penso allo studio del dottor Davide Schirru per quanto riguarda la Gera di Gesturi, però allo stesso tempo i nuraghi si vedono da lontano. Quindi una persona che vede un nuraghe da lontano potrebbe capire che quell'area è sotto il controllo di quella tribù, clan, chiamatelo come volete. Quindi, riassumendo, summarizing, we really cannot answer to this question without risking of going on more interpretation than facts. So I think there is another one, but we already answered it, and is for what they were made for. So I don't know if you want to answer to this or if it's just too tricky. I mean, it's not really everybody comes with this question, what they were made for.
Yeah.
And as we said before, we don't have really a scientific approach of answering this without going through all the stuff you have show us. So I always say for control is a place of power.
Yeah.
What kind of power? I don't know. That's my cruel answer to it. I don't know if it's political, military, religious, interception of all the things as it was most likely in the past. I think to the Middle Ages, like the military orders, the Hospitalieri, Templars, and they were like religious and military together. So what your impression with you don't feel forced to answer what you think
Yeah.
they could possibly be used for.
Yeah, that's the biggest question.
Yeah, it's tricky. I know. It's like the last question of the day.
Yeah. What one thing that I always think about is when you first look at it, when you first look at the Nuraghi in the landscape, what most people think of them as are because they are so big, because they do look like these towers, what people usually go to is the analogies of them as like some sort of defensive structure or as the seats of some kind of keef. So that's the easiest thing that most people go for, but of course it's a lot more complicated than that. So like what you said, I like the idea that they are places of power, so controlling the landscape. We know that like things like visibility, and then also like what we talked about today with like economic priorities, there's probably something about controlling the landscape, controlling visibility, controlling people in some way that the Nuraghi are made in that way. But there's definitely also a lot of other functions. So definitely power, but then after that, it's going to be very variable dependent on the type of Nuraghi. I'm someone who's more inclined to the argument that a lot of them are residential structures. So some people will disagree, but with some of the evidence that I've seen, a lot of them might be residential structures. So whether they are homes of elite people or ordinary, it's probably different depending on the case. But I would make the argument that at least some of them, if not most of them, would have been the homes of people as well.
I think that the term places of control, I really like it. I will use it from now on, more than places of power. It's like places of control. I like it very much. So, traducendo brevemente, io uso sempre questo termine che è luoghi di potere, places of power. Però il termine che è stato usato ora, che è luoghi di controllo, cioè siti di controllo o comunque punti di controllo, cioè il fatto è che questo termine può essere esteso a tante cose, quindi è molto utile, è un umbrella term, un termine che copre diversi punti, perché controllano il territorio, controllano le risorse economiche, controllano anche da un punto di vista visivo, quindi è molto adattabile, molto buono. Il dottor Griffith puntava, pur adducendo che molti non saranno d'accordo, però ad esempio dal suo punto di vista il fatto che siano presumibilmente, e qui sono ovviamente in parte d'accordo, sono luoghi in cui qualcuno risiedeva. E su questo penso che comunque, se non totalmente d'accordo, si possa essere parzialmente d'accordo in termini positivi. Cioè, è chiaro che in questi luoghi qualcuno risiedeva per un certo tempo, non erano luoghi completamente abbandonati, anche perché mostrano tutta una serie di evidenze, mostrano silos, mostrano pozzi. Cioè, poi la domanda vera è: vi risiedevano delle possibili elite o vi risiedeva la gente comune? Qua io la mia idea me la son fatta, però non voglio dirla ora. E il fatto è che sono strutture talmente complesse, almeno dal mio punto di vista, quasi da assimilarle molto alla lontana ai palazzi delle diverse civiltà, ad esempio della Grecia micenea o della Creta minoica. Cioè riassumono all'interno della struttura diversi ruoli. E questi ruoli, almeno dal mio punto di vista, a volte sembrano mimare diverse necessità. So I was saying that I believe you understood, but also for the other people that doesn't speak Italian, sometimes in these structures seems like stuff that you have already seen, like in the Mycenaean palaces and also in the Minoan ones. Like they have different kind of stuff inside, like silos, water wells, and other kind of things. And also the balcony, there's really not a clear use for that. Not, I mean, for me at least, in defensive terms. So yeah, I always think about these places of the minor version of the Mycenaean palaces. Like they were places of control, storing stuff, controlling the land, and also accumulating resources. So not really palaces, but so I mean, I cannot add anything more to your excellent explanation and presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for. I mean, there are no other questions.
Okay.
It was for me really interesting. I was extremely happy of listening for the first time the development of your research, and I'm surely like extremely grateful of have you on the channel. So thank you again. I can't wait to have you here another time, possibly also live, like by person.
Yeah. That would be awesome.
It will be very nice to do an interview.
Yeah.
I don't know when, but
hopefully soon. Yeah.
Hopefully, exactly. So if there is anything you want to add, people you want to salute, to thank, you have your 5 minutes of glory.
I mean, thanks. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was great just to talk with you and to talk about some of these ideas, and it's something that I'll look forward to talking with you more about whenever you have the time, and then as well this summer. It'll be great too. And yeah, I mean, just people to thank. I mean, just the people of the project for CD, like Emily Holt and Mauro Pera, they were instrumental in me being able to do some of this research and introducing me to this area. And then everyone else on the staff, including you and Siggy and everyone else, making it a great experience and teaching me more about the area. And especially all of the sites that you helped me point out on the map and the ones that you suggested. It was a great help seeing, getting more experience with the great diversity of sites that we have.
Thank you very much. I'm flattered of the words you have said about me, and also about all the rest of the staff that works on the project on Pranesidi. Of course, we also want to thank, ringraziamo poi chi conduce lo scavo in cui ci siamo incontrati, quindi la dottoressa Emily Holt e il dottor Mauro Perra, i direttori del sito, dello scavo più che altro, e diciamo che è stato un piacere ospitare il dottor Griffith qui. Spero che la presentazione vi sia piaciuta. A me è piaciuta veramente tanto, apre diversi nuovi punti di vista sulla questione. Alcuni erano già stati affrontati parzialmente in passato da altri autori, altri no, e quindi è questo veramente il significato della ricerca scientifica, cioè non basare su sentimenti di pancia, ma dare dati, combinarli, processarli e alla fine dire ok, i dati mostrano questo. Poi quale fosse la funzione delle strutture forse non lo capiremo mai, però almeno possiamo dire cosa dicono i dati, cioè i dati dicono questo, sono posti all'intersezione di queste diverse risorse. Questo per me è già tanto. Quindi ringrazio ancora il dottor Griffith per la bella serata che ci ha fatto passare, per la sua eccellente esposizione, e vi invito nuovamente a rimanere aggiornati sul canale, a iscrivervi, a condividere il video, a commentare, a mettere like e mi piace. So, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. Hope to see you soon, even not by person. So, thanks again. Grazie mille, dottor Griffith.
Thank you so much.
Buona serata a tutti. Arrivederci.